Mist clung to the banks of the San Pedro like lace left to soak, the morning light catching in its folds. The water moved slow, pulling reeds into its current, carrying the hush of a day still thinking about waking. Somewhere in that mist, a voice rose, clear but tender, like a bell muffled in cloth. It was not the kind of singing meant for an audience. It was the sort you did to remind yourself you were still here. Elias McGraw reined in his mare on the far bank, breath clouding in the chill. He had heard coyotes yip at night, the whistle of a kettle for miles off, the sound of rain on dry soil. This voice felt stranger than all of them. It pulled at something under his ribs, something that had been sleeping too long. He eased the mare forward, the grass whispering against her legs, until he could see her. She sat on a smooth rock with her skirt gathered around her boots, eyes closed. Hair like unbrushed wheat fell over her shoulders. The hem of her dress was mud-streaked, and the shawl at her back was too thin for the cold. Still she sang, fingers resting in her lap like they'd forgotten to be useful. When she opened her eyes and saw him, the singing stopped. He tipped his hat, slow and respectful, but she stood as if bracing herself for something unpleasant. "You from town?" she asked, voice low. "Not if I can help it," he said. His words were plain, but they carried a warmth she hadn't expected. Her gaze darted past him, down the road, as if afraid someone else might be coming. He dismounted, letting his mare graze. "You eaten?" She hesitated, hands working the edge of her shawl. "I'm fine." That was a lie, and they both knew it. He had the quiet patience of a man used to waiting out storms, so he didn't press. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and set a wrapped heel of bread on the rock where she'd been sitting. "I've got more home. Warm food." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you're here," he said simply, as though that were reason enough. For a long breath, she didn't move. Then hunger broke her pride, and she took the bread. The road to his place was mostly silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. The leather reins creaked under his hands, and she noticed the way his coat smelled faintly of hay and wood smoke. She held herself rigid, still half prepared for his kindness to change shape into something she recognized, something with terms. But it never did. His ranch was a wide piece of land folded into low hills, the barn leaning slightly from age. 2 rooms in the house, floors that groaned underfoot, a kettle always humming on the stove. He set another loaf on the table, then stepped back as if to give her space. "I'll be in the barn," he said. And that was all. She ate with the careful slowness of someone used to measuring out each bite. The bread was still warm inside. She didn't remember the last time food had been that way. That evening, she mended a tear in her skirt by lamplight, humming without realizing. Elias paused in the doorway, his hat in his hands, listening. When she noticed him, he looked away and pretended to inspect the worn heel of his boot. The next day, a calf slipped through a gap in the corral. Elias was already moving after it when she called out, "Let me." She surprised herself with the strength in her legs, the old farm skills that hadn't rusted entirely. Together they coaxed the calf back in, their laughter brief but unguarded. "You've done that before," he said. "My father's farm," she replied, brushing dust from her skirt. "Long time ago." They didn't speak of the long time since. By the 3rd day, the world intruded. Sheriff Amos rode up, all affable grin, with a pie from Mrs. Calloway balanced in his hand. "She says you might like some company out here," he told Elias, though his eyes slid to her with unspoken questions. Clara kept to the shadows of the porch, but the words carried. "Funny thing," Amos went on, "I hear the fella she came west for ain't too pleased. Fat rancher over near Willow Bend. Says she turned him down before she even unpacked. Folks talking about it." Elias didn't look at her. Folks will talk about the wind changing direction if it means they don't have to look at their own roofs falling in. The sheriff chuckled, but the words had teeth. Clara felt them settle deep. After Amos left, she stayed on the porch, staring at the land stretching empty toward the horizon. Shame was a taste she knew well, but this felt heavier, like it had been nailed to her. She thought of her younger sister, June, boarding a stagecoach even now to take her place with a man she'd refused. The thought was bitter enough to burn. Night came, cool and clear. Elias stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one beside her without a word. She wrapped her fingers around it, the heat working its way into her palms. She began to hum again, softly. Not for him, not for anyone, just to remind herself she still could. This time, Elias didn't walk away. He leaned on the rail, watching the stars. When she finally glanced at him, his eyes were on the darkness beyond the yard, but there was something in his stillness, something that made her think maybe he'd been listening all along. And though neither of them said it, both understood. The quiet between them was beginning to change. Snow clouds gathered over the hills in slow, bruised swells, the air sharp with the scent of oncoming winter. Clara pulled Elias's old coat tighter around her shoulders, the sleeves hanging past her hands. He had left on the back of her chair that morning without a word, and she had not given it back. In town, such a gesture would have been loaded with meaning. Out here, it simply meant he had noticed the cold on her skin. They rode into town in the slanting light, his mare steady, her eyes scanning the boardwalks where faces leaned just far enough out to watch them pass. Mrs. Calloway stood on her porch, arms folded, lips pursed into a line that could slice bread. Clara kept her gaze low until Elias slowed the horse and swung down, then turned to offer his arm. He did it like it was the most natural thing. Yet to her it felt like a shield, a subtle claiming in a place where words could be twisted into knives. Inside the mercantile, she tried on a wool coat, the smell of new fabric filling her lungs. Elias said nothing, only nodded when she caught him watching her in the cracked mirror. On the ride home, she hummed without realizing, the sound threading into the quiet between them like a stitch pulling 2 pieces closer. 3 days later, the stagecoach rattled into town with a sound like bones knocking together. June stepped down, cheeks flushed from the cold, dressed in a way that said she still believed new clothes could fix anything. Her eyes found Clara immediately. "You can't stay here," June said in a low voice when they were alone behind the depot. "People are already talking. That fat rancher is still fuming. You'll ruin yourself." Clara smiled faintly. "I think I already did." "I'm serious," June insisted. "This man McGraw, he's decent enough, but he's no future. Not for you. Don't settle for scraps." Elias was leaning on the hitching post across the street, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. He wasn't close enough to hear every word, but the stiffness in his posture told Clara he'd heard enough. That night, the wind came hard out of the north, rattling the shutters. Elias sat at the kitchen table, mending a saddle strap under the lamplight. Clara lingered in the doorway, the warmth of the fire licking her back. "I'll go," she said finally. "Tomorrow. You've been kind, but people will talk. I won't drag you through it." He didn't look up from his work. "You've got a voice that could make the winter less cold. That's reason enough to stay." Her throat tightened. "You don't even know me." He tied off the strap and set it aside, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. "I know enough." In the morning, frost silvered the corral rails, each breath a ghost. Clara was chopping kindling when a shadow fell across her. She looked up to see the fat rancher from Willow Bend, boots planted wide. June at his side with her gloves tucked neatly into her belt. "Well now," he said, voice thick with mockery, "look who's made herself at home." Elias stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He said nothing, but the way he planted himself between Clara and the man was answer enough. "Thought you were too good for me," the rancher went on. "But not too good for Charity?" Clara's hands were trembling, but she didn't reach for the axe again. Instead, she drew in a breath so deep it hurt and began to sing. The same song from the river, soft at first, then fuller, the notes carrying over the yard. The cold bit at her lips, but she sang until the sound was more than her voice. It was a refusal, a declaration, a stitching back of the pieces she'd been told to discard. The rancher's smirk faltered. June shifted uneasily, glancing between them. Somewhere beyond the yard, a pair of field hands paused to listen, their heads tilted like men catching the echo of a memory. When she stopped, the silence was clean and wide. The rancher muttered something under his breath, turned on his heel, and strode back to his horse. June hesitated, eyes darting to Clara, but followed. Elias still hadn't moved. He stood just behind her, close enough that she could feel the steady rise and fall of his breath. No hand on her shoulder, no words, but she knew he'd heard every note. The days that followed were quieter. The gossip didn't vanish, but it dulled, like a knife left out in the rain. Clara kept the coat Elias had bought her and began singing more often, sometimes by the fire, sometimes while walking the fence line. Elias never asked for it, never commented, but he always seemed to be within earshot. One night, the first snow came, soft and sure, covering the ground in a white that reflected the lamplight into the house. Clara stood at the window, watching it gather on the porch rail. Elias came up beside her, his presence solid and unhurried. "I've been thinking," she said. "About—" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she hummed the opening bars of her river song, low enough that it felt like a secret. When she glanced at him, his eyes were on her, and in them she saw something steady and certain, something that might one day be called love, but not yet, not now, and that, she realized, was exactly why she was not going anywhere.